Good evening. Many Prime Ministers would have sacked their Foreign Secretary many times over by now. Instead, Theresa May was today defending hers despite Boris Johnson attacking her Brexit stance for lacking guts. He also suggested Donald Trump would do a better job. But the Prime Minister would only go as far as stating the obvious, that her Foreign Secretary has strong views on Brexit, she said, just like she does. The row overshadowed Mrs May's trip to the G7 summit in Quebec, where she'd hoped, perhaps just for a few hours at least, to leave her domestic troubles behind.
They were smiling and waving for the cameras. But this is a divided and fractious G7. And for Theresa May, the problems bedeviling her divided and fractious cabinet have followed her all the way here. She'd barely arrived for the summit when she was confronted with recorded comments by her Foreign Secretary, saying her handling of Brexit was headed for a meltdown and describing European allies as the enemy.
Every time you want to deliver Brexit and seem to move forward, one of your own cabinet colleagues seems to undermine you and hamstring you in moving forward.
No, these are complex negotiations, but if you
Are
just
they helping
look...
you, though, these complex?
These are complex negotiations, but if you look at every stage of the negotiations so far, when people have cast doubt on whether we would get agreement in December on the joint report, we did, that mattered.
You've got the Foreign Secretary also describing your European allies as the enemy and the importance of taking the fight to the enemy. You're about to meet some of those members of the EU here. What do you say to them when you walk into the hall with your Foreign Secretary saying things like this?
When I work with my European allies, what we'll be doing here at the G7 is looking at issues that affect not just us, but other parts of the world.
I fully understand the agenda that you're going to negotiate with all of your sort of colleagues, but the fact is when you walk into these negotiation halls, those other leaders will look at you and saying, here is a Prime Minister that is being undermined by her own cabinet colleagues and, them paying no price. That must weaken your negotiating strength and position.
As we go into these negotiations, which are complex, nobody ever said this was going to be easy, but if you look at what happened before December, people said we wouldn't be able to negotiate that joint report, to get that financial settlement, to get the rights for citizens, both of Europe, the EU27 who are in the UK, and the UK citizens who are living in EU27 countries. People said they cast doubt on whether we could achieve the implementation period for business. We did both of these. Now we're looking ahead to negotiating what that future relationship is going to be.
Today, Boris Johnson made no comments whilst visiting a school in his constituency. That's what the Prime Minister wished he'd done a few days ago. Instead, he was recorded suggesting Donald Trump would do a better job of Brexit than her.
Imagine Trump doing Brexit. What would he do? He'd go in bloody hard. There'd be all sorts of breakdowns, there'd be all sorts of chaos. Everyone would think he'd gone mad, but actually, you might get something. So it's a very, very good call.
When you have your Foreign Secretary saying that he thinks that Donald Trump would do a better job of delivering Brexit, where does that leave you?
Well, look, there are strong views. Boris has strong views in Brexit, but so do I. I want to deliver Brexit for the British people, and I'm determined to do exactly that. And that's what I'm getting on and doing.
The political firestorm started by Boris Johnson won't have helped Theresa May in G7 negotiations tonight, where she's joining opposition to US tariffs against the UK and its allies. But keen to show she's in control of Brexit and her cabinet, she has said she will hold an away day with ministers soon for crucial talks at Chequers. Raggy Omar, News at 10, Canada.
Although the row that is thought to have pushed the Brexit Secretary David Davis close to resigning this week was put into perspective today when Europe's top Brexit negotiator cast doubt on both his and the Prime Minister's visions for the Northern Ireland border. Michel Barnier insisted any backup plan to keep Northern Ireland's border open, known as the backstop, could not be time limited. And he borrowed one of Theresa May's stock phrases to make his point, saying backstop means backstop.
Just yesterday, the Commission here in Brussels received a British proposal that, in the words of Theresa May, was a choice between the unacceptable and the unpalatable. Today, it rapidly became clear that her hard-won compromise on how long a so-called backstop agreement should last had one flaw. London is meant to be negotiating with this man, not each other. Michel Barnier made it brutally clear that an EU offer to allow Northern Ireland to effectively stay in the customs union if necessary is not an offer they've made to the whole of the UK.
The UK is taking a different angle, however. It is looking for a UK-wide solution. Let me clear, very clear, our.
James Mates, News at 10, Brussels.
Well, on top of the tensions in Canada over Brexit, Donald Trump sparked another debate before he'd even arrived. There was already a row brewing over his tariffs on steel and aluminium, and then the president suggested that Russia should be allowed to rejoin the G7. Moscow was suspended in 2014 after it annexed Crimea. Well, let's return now to Raggy, who joins us live from Quebec tonight. And Raggy, a pretty explosive suggestion from President Trump.
Yes, it was. It was a bit of a political hand grenade thrown in to the G7 meeting before it had even begun. He arrived, earlier today, and in front of the cameras, whilst meeting his other G7 counterparts, it was all smiles for the cameras. Quite a lot of bonhomie with the Canadian leader, Mr. Trudeau. But behind the scenes, there has been really a lot of rancour and a lot of harsh words between members, particularly this issue of allowing Russia back in. The Prime Minister, Theresa May, has said she's opposed to it. Angela Merkel said the same thing. It was too early for Russia to come back. But interestingly, the newly elected populist Italian leader, Mr. Conte, opened up divisions within Europe, saying that he'd welcome that. So it just goes to underline how much these G7 leaders are really divided on so many questions.
And that's before they've even got to the row over the trade tariffs, Raggy.
That's right. It's a big in tray of issues to iron out. The tariffs is one of the big ones. So is a lot of other issues. They're going to try and talk Mr. Trump down from that, particularly Theresa May. But it looks far unlikely that he will succumb to that.
Raggy, thank you very much indeed.